Welcome back, our dear viewers. We continue with our discussion on the rule of law. Before we took the break, Michael was explaining to us about the rule by law, where it comes from, in order to enable us understand the rule of law. Michael, were you?
Oh, no, not yet. I was just getting warmed up.
Okay.
So as I was saying, if the king didn't like a person, they'd just make an arbitrary law to affect either an individual or a group of individuals. That was rule by law. They used law to enforce the will, and anybody who broke that law was punished with, I think, like treason, or depending on the specific crime. So now, along as I was saying, then comes in rule of law. Now the beauty with rule of law is that it affects everybody. Now, because it's like that one, people have to be very, very careful about the rules that they make or the laws that they make, because it will apply equally to them, as equally to the maker, as it will apply to the people who will be affected by it. Yeah, so saying something like, let me see, having malaria is illegal. Should a mosquito bite you, you'll have broken the law, yet you made that law yourself. Yes. So that is why, that is the difference between rule of law and rule by law.
So before I move on to Doctor,
yes,
I just want to ask you a short question.
Definitely.
Just for clarity purposes. So from what I gather,
yeah,
under rule by law, we are enforcing the will of one person,
yeah,
or set of persons. And then under rule of law, we are trying to enforce the will of the people of that nation as
yes,
a collective.
yes.
Okay. Doctor, what is your contribution to
Well, I'll just give an
discussion?
example to what my colleague has said. I think in Swaziland, the story is said that recently the king had passed a rule that no one is supposed to have, I think, sexual relationships, because either it was in a bid to fight HIV or AIDS or something like that. Then the king goes ahead and does that, and he finds himself a cow, you know. So clearly the law is only working for the king, you know. It's he's able to break it as he sees fit, or adhere to it as and when he wants it. In Buganda here, we used to have a kabaka, or a king, called Mukavya. Mukavya meaning the one who makes people cry. You know? And then the story goes that Mukavya was such a ruthless king that finally people rose up and said, look, we cannot continue with this kind of leadership. And because of that conversation, like happened in England with the coming to of the Magna Carta with John I and so on, Kabaka Mukavya becomes Kabaka Mutesa. He changes his name from the one who makes people cry to the one who is able to kutesa, the one who is able to negotiate, to talk. So that could be like a good example of from rule by law, my will, my way, my stuff, to rule of, you know, there is a collective. We seem to understand one another. We agree to do things together in a certain way. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, I mentioned that we talked about the Constitution and constitutionalism last week.
Yes.
And it has kept coming up in this discussion.
Yes.
What is the relationship between the rule of law and constitutionalism?
I think rule of law, not even think, I know rule of law is a subset of constitutionalism, because constitutionalism is culture, customs, ways of doing things, the way people have agreed they are going to behave in a, you know, that is constitutionalism. We shall have democratic practices. We shall choose leaders after a certain number of years. Everybody has a right to say something. All those things that we do is a culture of constitutionalism. That is why the United Kingdom does not need a constitution to have constitutionalism, right? Because the constitution is just a summation, a summary, putting in writing what is already in practice. So rule of law, therefore, comes in as an exemplification, one of those things that exemplify the culture of constitutionalism, the behavioral patterns that people have in this regard. So the two are connected. Under the bedrock or the foundation of constitutionalism, one of the springboards is the rule of law. Yes, that's why the two are almost, well, I should say they are inseparable.
Yeah, they work together as a team. Because you find that the rule of law actually helps protect constitutionalism and helps the development of constitutionalism. Because if everybody follows the laws that exist, how it's supposed to be done, you'll find that no one will try to get ahead of other people to abuse the laws that will affect, the end result of which will affect constitutionalism. Because if everybody has to follow the specific law, then that means no one will try to attempt to use those very laws to abuse everybody else. I think it has happened in a lot of countries. Because the moment rule of law is not respected, constitutionalism goes out of the window.
Okay.
Maybe an example is of President Trump. When President Trump came into power in the United States, we were saying he's going to build a wall that keeps away the Mexicans and other groups. But you can't do that without the support of the other arm of government, which is the Congress. Here we call it the legislature or the parliament. He needed them to do that, all right? So because the law is so paramount in the United States, he did not succeed in getting his wall, or at least not yet, you know? Look at President Obama.
Yes.
Obama came in 2008 with the promise of closing down Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
But it's not so easy when you live in a society that respects the rule of law. You can't come and bulldoze things the way you want them. Look at our current constitution and what happened, I think it was last year. If the constitution had not been amended, it was going to be impossible for the current president of Uganda to stand once again.
Yeah, and if you saw the steps that had to be taken before that goal was finally achieved, you see that various organs had to come into play. First, the executive had to come, the president had to come in to ask parliament to change that provision, that article. After it was changed, constitutional petitions were brought up and court had to come in to make a final decision. If there was no rule of law, it would be something like, oh, I want to stand again. That article is no longer valid. I have decreed. Someone crosses it out of the book. But no, it had to pass through a series of grueling procedures. And you can see even the members of parliament, their 7-year term fell on their way as a result of the judiciary, the courts coming in to say it was not, that specific amendment was not passed properly. That is rule of law at work.
So that brings me to a question.
Yeah.
We cannot all, from wherever we are, come to hold one person or different people accountable in relation to the rule of law. So which bodies have we put in place as a people to enable us achieve this, to enable us uphold the rule of law and make sure that everyone is accountable? Because, for example, I cannot stand up and run to State House and tell the president, you're not adhering to rule of law. But there should be a mechanism through which I should reach him. So which bodies have we put in place to enable us to do that?
It's interesting that you ask the question, which bodies have we? And I think people would wonder why you would say we, but I guess we should start from there. Article 1 says, all power belongs to the people who shall exercise their sovereignty in accordance with this constitution. So when we talk about we, it means you and I. Sabbatical 3 or clause 3.
And that includes the
yes,
viewers
the
as
viewers,
well.
Yes. Says all power and authority of government and its organs derive from this constitution, which in turn derives its authority from the people who consent to be governed in accordance with this constitution. So ideally, everything begins here. Because once again, this is where we decided we are going to do all the issues that deal with our governance and how we decide to behave as a society in the nation. And right here, you'll begin to see the fact that when you talk about government, we are talking about the parliament, who has the critical role of making the law, among other duties. Then you have the executive, headed by the head of state, that has the rule of enforcement of the law or bringing in suggestions of what other laws can be debated by the parliament. And then you have the judiciary that you talked about, that has the duty to pronounce itself and interpret the application of this role, of this law. So I guess we could start from there, of having specific organs that form the government, that have specific ways of, or specific mandates on how it should be done. Yeah.
Is that, okay, please, Michael.
I feel like I should also add the issue of separation of power. In order to prevent one of the organs Dr. Ruiz had mentioned from gaining too much power, each of these organs are independent and can operate on their own without influence from the other organs. Now, it's because these organs are all separate. That is, the government, the court, and the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. At least that is what we call them. Basically, the executive, that is the president and the ministers. Members of parliament fall under the legislature, and now when you hear about judges, magistrates, now that is the judiciary. Now, all of them act to check each other's powers so that no person can, if one person doesn't follow the rule of law, meaning if someone tries to create a law that is not for the benefit of everybody, then the other organs come in one way or another. Because in the grand scheme of things, how the rule of law operates is this. Before any law is passed, there's nothing like waking up one day and saying all Asians must leave, as happened in the 1970s. No. If Amin was following the rule of law, what would have happened was you'd propose a law, not just make a decree. The executive comes together and creates a policy for that law, which is then sent to Parliament. Parliament then looks at the law and decides if the law is okay to be passed. If they feel it's okay to be passed, they then pass the law. If someone feels that that law goes against the Constitution, they can then bring a constitutional petition to challenge that law. And if court feels that that law goes against the Constitution, then it will be struck down. And that is how rule of law is maintained nowadays.
Okay, so you've talked about a rule going against the Constitution,
yes,
being challenged in the courts of law.
Yeah.
What if it's the Constitution itself that I find problematic?
Well, in that case then, what comes out clearly is that when there is something with the Constitution, remember Article 1 is saying that power belongs to the people. And there are provisions in the Constitution that deal with those scenarios whereby, like happened last year, like happened in 2005, you can have a plebiscite, you know, a referendum that once again deals with that very question of asking, do we still need this provision? Making the case for its amendment so that it can address that issue that came up. Okay, so for example, when the removal of the presidential term limits came up, they had to follow that same method. Removal of the presidential age limit, consulting of the people. As to whether people were consulted properly or not is another question. But that is the idea behind it. Sometimes you have what you call recommendations from the judiciary, whereby, like in 2016, when we are part of the amicus curiae application in the Amama Mbabazi versus President Museveni and the Electoral Commission pleading, where we are saying there are certain things that need to be done. So the judiciary can bring this to the attention of the legislature, that there are certain things that need to be addressed. Now, let's look positive. Let's look at the amendment that was proposed regarding the age limit. You see, it also addressed the lower age limit. Without going into the specific arguments, what came out there is the fact that a person who is 18 years is now able to stand for president. If they are able to fit all the requirements that are then provided for as required, you know, where the Electoral Commission is concerned. So, but to answer your specific question, yes, you can have a referendum that addresses these questions. Sometimes it can come from people, from the people themselves, or in this case, it was a private member's bill, Majezi, as he was called. Yes, we have some issues with the broader scheme of things regarding the basic structure doctrine of the Constitution as it is today, but I think that addresses the question that you have raised. Yes.
I want to thank you very much, Dr. Ruiza and Michael, for joining us today. We have run out of time, but we shall be back next week to continue with this conversation. Thank you very much. Dear viewers, thank you very much for joining us. This has been Breaking the Law, where we break down the law to bite-sized pieces to enable you understand it better. We hope to be with you again same time next week.